All right. Let's start back when I was 15 years old for a diary. The year of my last girlfriend. Um, yeah, I was coming into grade 8, just growing up, kind of being a normal kid with a 12-stepper for a parent. And I don't know, I was doing the normal stuff. I was drinking, I was smoking pot, I had a part-time job, kind of. I worked 32 hours a week, and I attended school. I didn't actually do anything, but I attended. And yeah, there was a time when acid came into town, and I did 3 tabs of acid over, I don't know what it was, like 3 or 4 weeks. Anyway, my mother caught wind of this, and it drove her like batty nuts, right? And there was a lot of just conversation and tension and infighting inside the house, and I was laying in bed, and I didn't know if it was an air vent or what. It's I was kind of at an emotional breaking point with my mother, and her drama and all of her freaking out about how I'm going nuts. And finally, I just went up to our room and I said, I heard what you and Brian were talking about. She flipped, called the cops on me. 20 minutes later, about 3 cop cars are there and about 17 police. And I got hauled off to a psych ward. And anyway, at the psych ward, I remember going in there, and I was cursed right from the get go. Like, Dr. Smith, he looked at me and said, All right, Graham, what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you a train of thought test. I'm going to see how your train of thought is. So many bytes of information you can actually remember. And he explained to me he was going to tell me 5 words, and then he kind of briefly writes down 5 words, looks at me, keeps writing, looks at me again, keeps writing, looks at me again, keeps writing. And anyway, he goes, "All right, Graham, I'm gonna say 5 words, and I want you to repeat them back to me." And I'm like, "Oh my God, are you serious? Oh, this is the magical psychiatric test, apparently." So he goes, hand, mountain, sky, Mr. Jones, and hope. Word for word, those were the exact words that he said to me over 20 years ago. Hand, mountain, sky, Mr. Jones, and hope. So I repeat the stuff back to him anyway. He's like, oh yeah, drug-induced psychosis. What? Are you kidding me? 2 weeks later, I came out of the psych ward with about 17 different types of medication. There were about 38 different colors. I mean, like the really strong ones. You got to mix the colors. Like, mixing colors kind of works like racing stripes. It just makes them a lot stronger. So if you want really good pills, get mixed colored pills because they're twice as strong. So for the next 6 months of my life, I'm sleeping 19, 20 hours a day. And there was times when apparently my stepsister would come in because I'd be screaming, like I'd be having nightmares and I'd be screaming and I wouldn't wake up. She'd be shaking me, she'd be throwing me around and all this and telling my mom, right? And she didn't do a thing. She just left it. So like for me, the only way I could rationalize that, like my mom isn't a very intelligent person. She's smart, but she's not intelligent. And the way that she kind of figured was the psychiatrist was putting me to sleep for 6 months and magically fixing my brain, you know. And anyway, 6 months later, we get into the psychiatrist's office, and this is where I don't believe my mom when she tells me, "Well, I just kind of figured the psychiatrist was fixing you by putting you to sleep," because this whole entire time, this psychiatric discussions going on between my mom and Dr. Smith. I'm sitting there. I'm no longer going to school. I'm no longer employed. I'm sleeping 20 hours a day. I'm dead set on telling the psychiatrist what he's done to my life. you, so I'm trying to butt in here while my mother is discussing my psychiatric condition, and I'm like, hey, and she'd be hitting me, right? She'd be like, hey, hey, the adults are talking. Finally, I just walk right over that woman like it was either she was going to get murdered, he was going to get murdered, or they were taking me off the pills. Like I was at that point, murder or less medication. So I interject, and I politely interrupted her rude domination of me. And anyway, I told this psychiatrist, I'm sleeping 20 hours a day. I've dropped out of school. I've quit my job. I've got no friends anymore. Like, I've got no girlfriend. I've got a completely destroyed social image, thanks to you. Hand, mountain, sky, Mr. Jones, and Hope, you know. And he changed the medication. I'll give him that. He put me on a different mixture. He kept the cogentin in there, so my intelligence kind of went from, I don't even know where it's at, let's say 120 in there till about 3. Like there's no short-term memory with cogentin, right? And there was no way that I could get short-term memories into my long-term because I didn't have a short-term memory. So for the next 4 years of my life, I was a walking stupid idiot who couldn't remember anything. I mean, you'd tell me 3 digits and I'd not know any of them. And, that was my experience with psychiatrists, and just their tests and how one-sided they are and how they're really not too fair. I mean, like a train of thought test, he tested me with 5 bytes of information. I can easily remember a phone number, which is 7 bytes, and somehow I still get doped up like that. So he really got started on a bad note in my mind when he did that. Remember 5 words: hand, mountain, sky, Mr. Jones, and Hope. And I remember him, and then he locks me up for 2 weeks and sends me out with like 37 million different types of pills that are 197 different colors. And I think that was one of the single most important things that had ever happened to me in the, psychiatric torture that I had to go through. Like he had no credibility with me. He tried to make it seem serious. Like he came at me, you're psychotic, you have schizophrenia in your M. I took that about as serious as nothing. I mean, just despite the guy, sometimes I wouldn't go on pills for 3 weeks and I'd feel better. And I even legitimately let him catch me from time to time. I'd take nothing because I knew a blood test was coming up, and my blood would be empty of medication, right? And he'd be flipping. What? I don't see any medication in your bloodgram. Like, it's just the psychosis. It must be like totally overwhelming. No, yeah. I mean, the voices, they're just deliriously staggering, man. My life, it's like debilitating right now. That's why I do this to myself. Dick, and eventually he knew that I didn't take anything he had to say serious, so it seemed like he tried to humor me. It's like, all right, well, let's give you a diagnosis that's trendy. There's a whole bunch of really famous bipolar singers. Let's call them bipolar. So I was bipolar 1 for a few years. And I experimented with cocaine, and I did legitimately have a psychosis from cocaine, so I was bipolar 2 because I'd had a break, a cocaine break from reality, and I don't even know what to say. I mean, like, drugs has always kind of been a part of my life. It's not something that I responsibly use. Like, I'm excessive. I'm an addict. I'm an addict, and man, I don't even know how to build all that. Like, I've got, extreme trust issues for a lot of people. I don't really have any compassion for anybody, and I don't really have any regard for the idea of a long-term friendship or relationship or anything. I just kind of play with people. I mean, I know what they like. I know how to kind of appeal to them and, entertain them and shit, but I really don't let myself care about people. Like that's where I'm at now, 20 years later, and a lot of it kind of has to do with, that naive help from my stupid mother, you know. And yeah, I know that's probably offensive. How dare you call your mother stupid? That's just how I view it. Like she watched her son sleep for 6 months, thought it was a cure, and then was going to continue on for God knows how long if I wouldn't have threatened to murder people about my medication, you know. So says something about my character, I guess. Either it's bad or it's good or it's something, I don't know. There was an organism that knew it wasn't being treated or medicated properly, and it was willing to just give its life up so that it could live properly. And, I guess that self love, it's always kind of grown, right? Like I've never really questioned my ability or my capability or where I should be standing in life. Like it's even as a schizophrenic kid, I went and I worked service rigs, with no short-term memory because I was still actively taking cogentin when I was working service rigs, and once the bipolar 2 or bipolar 1 diagnosis came along, then, I could think, I could remember a lot better, and I pursued other interests. I hated service rigs. It was way too manual. It was just way too manual. It was like idiot work that I could do and not actually have to think, but when he did change the medication a little bit, like my mood wasn't very good. I was just really belligerent. I really hated my mother, and that rage was always there, and I couldn't get rid of it. I couldn't get rid of the anger. It was always there, and I got an underbalanced drilling, more of a brain, just no emotional control. And I kept that job for about 4 years. I ended up getting a house. I refused to go to my mom to ask for help, so I just figured that out on my own, like how to get a house. Like I secured the loan at first with my RSPs, and I played around with secured credit cards, and I built like a banking portfolio. I had RSPs, I had GICs, mutual funds, all this fancy stuff to make myself look really rich and really promising for a bank. And they bought that like hook, line, and sinker. They gave me a mortgage for a house. They approved me for $140,000. I was, uncomfortable with $1,000 a month mortgage, which is what that would have worked out to be. So I settled for 84,000, which was like 650 something. I can't remember. So bipolar 1 Graham had a house. And my doctor was upset about that. When he first heard about my mortgage, he's like, "What? What kind of financial responsibility have you taken on? And why didn't you consult me before you bought it? And like, you shouldn't be doing this kind of stuff. It's financially irresponsible." And it wasn't. I mean, the mortgage was cheaper than the rent of my 1 bedroom apartment, and I had a 5 bedroom house. So he's stupid. I knew it. Didn't say it. It just didn't get me anywhere. I think I did go off my medication once again and just kind of showed him that I didn't have any medication in my blood, just to teach him a lesson. You know, true story. And anyway, by then I think I had about 3 years with this underbalance drilling company, and they were ready to promote me. They actually wanted me to run a shift. So I ended up getting a Duramax diesel, 2002 crew cab Duramax diesel, because they would pay the max for that. I think I got $75 a day plus 49 cents a click. Plus I had my day rate, which was $195 a day. So I believe my base rate was $385. You'll have to do the math on that. 195, 75, then 49 minimum for my 100-kilometer minimum. And yeah, life just kind of went from there. And I hit a point where I got sick of always being stuck out in camp. So I was like, I need to change my life a little bit. And there was a bunch of trucking firms that had a 15-day on, 6-day off rotation. So I was like, all right, I'll get into that and I'll get my class 1. And that's kind of when my professional life took a detrimental turn for the worse, because as soon as I got to class 1, I went into a regular doctor and she got over psychiatric stuff, and I didn't think anything about it. She says, "Do you have any psychiatric conditions?" I'm like, "Well, yeah, I got bipolar 2." That was the worst decision I ever made my whole entire life, actually, being honest about that psychiatric condition, because it got smeared all over my license, and then it got smeared all over my work, and smeared all over all these new places that I wanted to work out. They had to give the crazy little bipolar boy, a 52-ton truck that's probably worth about $6 million. Like, all that oil field equipment is very specialized. It's very unique. It's all hand built, and it's really expensive. So it created a lot of financial insecurity for me. I got, offered a lot of jobs, but usually it was like, "Oh yeah, well, we hired a bipolar boy once and he couldn't make it and he couldn't handle the stress. So we'll give you a job in the yard, and if you're really promising, we'll put you in a loader." That's about the best you could ever expect out of your life. That's the best we could do for you. We had a bipolar kid work for us once. He couldn't hack it, so we're not going to give you a chance. And when that happened, I started to look around. Like I wasn't near as stupid as Dr. Smith thought I was. I mean, I really started questioning my ability to finance my home. I really started questioning the ability to finance that Duramax diesel. It was $750 in a month in 2005. So it was a significant truck payment, right? And then I had commercial insurance, which was a little bit cheaper than private insurance in Alberta. So I had the better deal there, but it just created financial insecurity. It's like there's no guarantee that I can pay for what I have anymore. So I sold my house. I doubled up. I think I bought the house for 84,000. I sold it for 168. Like I literally doubled up. I paid out my truck. By then I had a $5,000 line of credit. I paid that out and canceled it. I paid my life off, and I walked away with $36,000 and took off to Hawaii for a little bit. And that's just kind of when hope left, like action style hope. Like I went to Edmonton, floundered around, I retired for a year basically. I just spent the 36,000 that I had, and then once I got broke, I went back to work. I got into structural steel, so I was building high rises. That was my job. I was an iron worker. And I did that for about 4 years. I started up in Fort McMurray. It was the easiest to get started in ironworking up there because it was so busy. And once I got some experience built up, I got into high-rise construction. I built Penny Lane Tower in Calgary. I built a lot of warehouses down there, and I did a lot of, real ironworking. And while I was there, I didn't have my license at that time. It'd been revoked because I refused to go get these medicals, and I refused to get the general medicals, and then they'd find out about my past. It's like, okay, well, there's drug history here. This is how all this psychiatric stuff came along. So they'd start asking for like drug tests every 3 months, and I wouldn't even do it. I'd be like, no, just take the license. So I sold the truck, lost the license. I was an on-foot iron worker. And the thing about ironworking is it only takes about 9 months to build a high rise, right? Like to frame that thing, and then we have to move to a new town, and it was too much of a burden to keep the job. And, just stuff came around. I was really heavy into drugs. I'm like, all right, I'll give this drug addiction thing a real try. So I went into a recovery house, and I finished the program. At the end, he said, you're not an addict, and if you are, you're not ready to face it yet. This isn't a good house for you. I'm not going to kick you out of here, but maybe look at getting into Oxford or something like that. So, I was like, whatever at this point. I had $300 in my pocket because a welfare check had come in, and I was like, you know what? I want to have a bath in the ocean. So I bought a $97 ticket out to Vancouver, and that's where homelessness started for me. I knew I wasn't going to have a place when I got there, and I knew I'd have nowhere to live, and I didn't care. I was like, hey, whatever, let's just go. I want to have a bath in the ocean. I'm a full grown man. I'm allowed to have these experiences. I've got nothing to lose. Maybe I don't really have anything to gain, but I've got nothing to lose. So whatever, I'm going to go bath in the ocean. And that's kind of where my homelessness started, was in Vancouver. So the first night, I can't even remember. I walked out of the Greyhound and I looked around at this bright new world. I had like $40 in my pocket. Like, wow, I'm home. I've arrived. Life is amazing, and I found out how unamazing it was that night. I was sleeping right next to a dumpster. The wind was nuts, man. It was like just blowing, right? And around 3 o'clock in the morning, I think I learned the single most important thing every homeless person should know. Tuck your shirt in before you go to sleep, because that wind was whistling right up my shirt, right? And I was frozen. And there was people talking kind of off in the distance. And at this time at night, with this kind of a situation that's going on, it just creeped me out. So I got up and I walked around the block a little bit, and I came across some kind of a homeless shelter. I don't know. It was the Hilton at this point because I was cold. Anyway, I knocked on the door, and they gladly gave me a mat. They're like, well, here's a mat, here's a bed. And anyway, I went and I slept, and that was my new home. That got me started in the shelter circuit. It's like, okay, I can sleep here, I can eat here, I can stay alive in these areas and not have to sleep outside with a frozen back. So that's what I started to do. I went to this homeless shelter. I mean, it didn't take very long for that helpless homeless feeling to start setting in. Like I wasn't gonna go down to Granville. I wasn't going to associate with anyone my own age because when I'd go and use the washroom or the urinal, little black bugs would kind of crawl out from under my shirt and then climb back in. They were bed bugs. I was infested. It was very bad. That's, yeah, true facts. I was infested with bed bugs. So, I'm just stuck in this life. It's like, what do I do? Like I'm infested with bed bugs. I'm living in a homeless shelter. There was a guy there who was he was extremely schizophrenic, but he had this really interesting thing where he found rips in the universe and he'd stitch them together. So he'd be walking around all night and he'd be doing this. He'd be rubbing his fingers together like he's, kind of rolling the universe back together. So that was his thing, right? And he was my next door mat mate. So I'm like, whatever, this is cool. He's keeping my universe solid for me. This is awesome. I love this roommate, and just yeah, this is one of my roommates. I don't want to name drop you if you don't. Yeah, it's Brian. It's Brian, and yeah, yeah, lots. And yeah, I'd lost track on where I was at. Oh yeah, the Universe Stitcher, my bed or my mat mate, and it's I carried that on for so long, and it hit a point where that wasn't really acceptable for me anymore. It's just I couldn't handle the dirtiness. They didn't have a shower in this shelter. It was dirty, and I was dirty, and I knew how dirty I was because bugs would crawl out from under my clothing. So I didn't want anybody to see me. You know, like besides the people at the shelter staff at the shelter because they were just as bad. I mean, it was infested. And I'm gonna stop there because I'm stuck on that.